And I'll tell you a very interesting thing. Parshas Naso, this week's Parsha, as a rule, is the Parsha after Shavuos, always. Except, and by now you all know the year where everything is awry, except in the unusual case where it's a leap year and Rosh Hashanah falls out on a Thursday. So then there's an extra Shabbos in the winter, and that causes everything to be altered. Naso then becomes the Shabbos before Shavuos. But barring that exceptional case, Naso is the Shabbos after Shavuos. And there are some very interesting things about Parshas Naso. First, it's the longest Parsha in the Torah. 176 psukim. And that number, by the way, 176, is significant. It's 22 times 8, which are both significant numbers. 22 is the number of letters in the Hebrew alphabet. So everything is comprised of 22 letters. And 8 is a symbolic number which implies something which is beyond
creation,
the natural world. Whereas the natural world is symbolized in the number of 7 days of the week. Now, the reason for that is, by the way, because the physical world really should be represented by the number 6. Because in the same way we speak of 3 dimensions, length, width, and depth, that means from a point in 3-dimensional space, you can go in 6 directions. Imagine a point. You can go up, down, right, left, forward, backward. So therefore, really, physical space that we call 3 dimensions is really 6-sided. A cube has 6 sides. And Shabbos, the 7th, so to speak, is the spiritual core. The spirituality which is at the core of the physical world. So therefore, the physical world invested with the spirituality is symbolized by 7, but 8 means something which is beyond. 8 is a symbolic number which goes beyond the natural world. And when we take the 22 letters of the Aleph Beis and we elevate it to the supernatural, that's 22 times 8, which is 176. Now there's something else which is 176, interestingly. The famous Psalm, Kuf Yutes in Tehillim, which is a psalm about the Torah, actually, also is comprised of 176 verses. It's for each of the 22 letters of the Aleph Beis, you have 8 verses. And it's also the same idea, because 22 times 8 really is what Torah is. It's the 22 letters of the Aleph Beis raised to a supernatural level. So that's Naso after Shavuos. But more interesting, I think, is the fact that if you look in the works of Chazal that were written based on the Chumash, you find there's more on Parshas Naso than anything else. So we're going to look at the Medrash Rabbah, the Medrash which is on the Parshas of the Torah. You'll discover that by far there's more on Parshas Naso than any other Parsha. By a factor of 10. It's just a tremendous amount was written in the Medrash on Parshas Naso, more than any other Parsha. And if you look in the Zohar, you'll discover there's more that's written on Parshas Naso than any other Parsha in the Torah. And in fact, one of the most famous sections of the Zohar, called the Idra Rabbah, really is based on Parshas Naso. And it's one of the fundamental parts of the Zohar. Again, there's more in Parshas Naso than any other Parsha. So the question is, why is that? So the Chidushei Arim, the Ger Rebbe, once pointed out an amazing thing, that we know that Shavuos is a time of inspiration. It's a reliving of the acceptance of Torah, and we're all inspired to recommit ourselves to the study of Torah, the practice of Torah. So therefore it makes perfect sense that right after Shavuos there should be an extra dose of inspiration. And that expresses itself in extra creativity and extra toiling in Torah. And the Medrash and the Zohar, this is the product of that. And it may be this is why, when the Parshas were divided up, such a big chunk was assigned to the Shabbos after Shavuos, Parshas Naso, 176 psukim, because really this is a time which is auspicious to really be very, very bold in the amount of Torah we undertake to study and learn, following the inspiration of Shavuos. So this is really a very, very great time, a very, very inspired time. There's a lot in the parsha. I'm going to talk about one mitzvah in the parsha. And this is the mitzvah of Sota. Now, the Sota is a woman who is suspected of adultery. Because what happened? Her husband warned her, do not seclude yourself. Don't be alone with such and such man. And it's because the husband suspects her. That's called kinui. Kinui. The kineis ishto. He warns his wife. It's called kinui. Now, what happens if subsequent to the kinui, she in fact secludes herself? She finds herself alone with that man. That's called stira. Stira means being alone. So if there is kinui and stira, there was a warning, and subsequently she was secluded with that man, that creates a suspicion. And the only way that that suspicion is clarified, unless of course there are witnesses, but if there are no witnesses, it is clarified by a ritual which is performed in the Beis HaMikdash, that the Sota, actually her husband, for her, brings a special carbon, it's a flour offering of barley flour, and a special type of water is prepared. The water is taken from the kiyar, from the basin, from which the Kehanim wash in the Beis HaMikdash, and there is a scroll which is written, which contains blessings and curses. In other words, if she is guilty, then some such terrible things will happen to her. If she's innocent, then she'll be blessed, to the contrary. And this scroll is erased into the water. The ink is scratched off the parchment into the water, and she's given this water to drink. And if she is guilty, the water brings terrible suffering upon her, ultimately death. If she's innocent, to the contrary, brings blessing upon her. And this is how her guilt or innocence is clarified. And this is the mitzvah of Sota. Now, there are several things that are very, very interesting about this parsha, but I'm going to raise just three. Number one is the particular place where this parsha is inserted. It's clear from the Torah, and Chazal confirmed this, this is one of the parshias, this is one of the sections that was taught to Moshe Rabbeinu on the day of the dedication of the Mishkan. When the sanctuary was dedicated on the 1st of Nisan, so there were certain parshias, certain sections were taught to Moshe Rabbeinu. This is one of them. Now I understand that it may be very important, but why, of all things, was it necessary to teach this to Moshe Rabbeinu on the day the Mishkan was to be dedicated? Like, this couldn't wait. It had to be. But this parsha had to be taught to Moshe Rabbeinu on that day. It doesn't seem to have any relevance to the dedication of the Mishkan. On the other hand, the whole ritual of Sota, at first glance, has only to do with the Mishkan. As I understand, it's a very, very useful thing to have some ritual by which the Sota's innocence or guilt can be determined. But why does it have to be performed in the Beis HaMikdash? Because why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu have to set up this ritual in such a way that involves bringing the Sota to the temple, the sacrifice being performed, etc.? It would be perfectly fine if this ritual could take place wherever the suspicion took place. What is the idea of bringing this trial, so to speak, for adultery into the Beis HaMikdash itself? Like, of all places, what does that do with the Beis HaMikdash? There are laws, there are halachas about types of things that may be done in the shul, may not be done in the shul. Because nowadays, we tend to be lenient. We cut corners in these areas because usually for a Jewish community, the largest open space is the shul. So if there's a lecture, we'll do it in the shul. If there's a comedian performing, we'll do it in the shul. If there's a concert, we'll do it in the shul. But that's not really correct. Really, a shul should only be used for holy purposes. You don't use a shul for a lecture except a Torah lecture. And you wouldn't use a shul for a concert, and you wouldn't use a shul for a performance of some other kind. As a shul is a holy place, it's for prayer, it's for Torah study. I mean, that's what it's used for. So it seems very strange. We have this woman, okay, there's a suspicion, it has to be clarified. There's a ritual. Why do we perform this ritual in the temple of all places? But this is really one question. Because once we understand why this ritual is performed in the temple, we may understand why it had to be taught to Moshe Rabbeinu on the day of the dedication of the temple. It's really two aspects of the same question. What is the connection of the Sota to the Beis HaMikdash? Just two halves of the question. One is, why do we perform the ritual at all in the Beis HaMikdash? And therefore, why are the laws of the ritual taught on the day of the dedication of the Beis HaMikdash? Okay, we'll leave that on the back burner. Another very, very peculiar question about Sota. And by the way, you may have heard questions about Sota. We're not going to touch on some of the classic questions. We're going to touch on some of the questions that are a little off the beaten track. The Torah says that if the Sota is guilty, so terrible calamities befall her, and if she's innocent, she's blessed. Now, this seems to be a little strange. Even if the Sota is innocent, it doesn't mean that she's a great tzedekah. Because after all, she was warned not to be with this man. She found herself with this man. She should have avoided that type of suspicion. We actually subject her to humiliation in any case. By bringing her to the temple, and the Torah describes how she's degraded, it's a very, very embarrassing thing, even if ultimately she is cleared. And we assume that she's deserving of this bizayon, she's deserving of this degradation, because she really did something wrong. So why is it, if she turns out to be innocent, that she's blessed? I mean, it should be enough that she doesn't suffer. But why should she be deserving of blessing? The Talmud says, for example, if she was unable to have children, now she'll have children. If her labor pains were very, very painful, now they'll be lighter. If the children were not so beautifully formed, now they're going to be unusually beautiful. Why should she be blessed? Okay, she's not guilty of adultery, but she's certainly not a tzedekah of the highest level. And there are many answers given to this question. The Ramchal, Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, is terribly bothered with this question. He gives an answer like this. He wrote a little commentary on Chumash called Megillah Starim, and he says that really it's not a reward. She's drinking water from the kiyar, that holy vessel. So really, that holy water should have the natural consequence of bringing blessing. It's only that if she's guilty of a sin, so then HaKadosh Baruch Hu miraculously uses that water to bring about punishment. But if in fact she's innocent, then the water has its natural effect and she receives blessing. So according to Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, it's not so much that she's blessed because she's innocent in this instance. She's blessed because that's a natural consequence of drinking such water. So perhaps according to Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, if you had a woman, let's say, who she's not a Sota, but she had difficulties in childbirth, or perhaps she was unable to have children, maybe you'd say that it's a good idea for her to drink this type of water, because this way she'll have a refuah, she'll have healing. In other words, but it's not that we reward the Sota per se. This is the approach that Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto takes, but it seems to be difficult. It seems that from the simple reading of the verses, that this is really a consequence of the Sotas being cleared. I think that our starting point should be an understanding of the importance of marriage in Jewish thought. Right now in the world out there, there is a great debate going on about marriage, about homosexual marriage, gay marriage, etc. Various states have approved of this, other states are resistant. And it raises the question that why should the state be interested in marriage at all? If two people want to live together, if they want to commit themselves to one another, if they want to become financially entangled, why is this any business of the state? Why should the state be concerned about that? This is a totally private thing. Why is it that the state legislates, the state licenses marriage? What is the point of it? So, some scholars have written that the state has an interest in its own self-perpetuation, and therefore it wishes to promote the institution which is integral to its own self-perpetuation, which is marriage. Marriage really is the ideal format for the giving birth to and raising of children, and therefore the state has a vested interest in promoting marriage. Of course, this is an argument which would go against homosexual marriage. The state should not necessarily want to promote that as an alternative. And, other scholars have other arguments. But I'm just pointing out it's a debate. The Torah's interest in marriage may be multifaceted, but I'd like to share with you at least one aspect of it, which is this. If you look in Tanakh, especially in the prophets, you find that adultery is a metaphor which is used for idolatry. Because when the Navi is looking for a metaphor, for a muscle, to illustrate the evil of idolatry, the evil of betraying God to worship other gods, the example which is given is a wife betraying her husband and committing adultery. And this is a metaphor we find in Hosea and in Yechezkel, in many of the books of the prophets. This is the metaphor they use. You also understand something about metaphor. Because metaphor always tries to explain, describe the unfamiliar in terms of the familiar. In other words, if I would come to you and say, oh boy, did I have a good dinner tonight? He says, yeah, what'd you have? I had kangaroo for dinner. Now, probably, anybody ever eat kangaroo? Nobody. So you ask me, well, what does kangaroo taste like? So I would tell you, now I would say that kangaroo is a cross between octopus and the hippopotamus. Right? That wouldn't explain anything, right? Because you can't explain the unfamiliar in terms of the unfamiliar. It has to be, you explain the unfamiliar in terms of the familiar. So therefore, I would have to tell you, oh yeah, kangaroo tastes just like chicken. Oh, now I understand. Because chicken is familiar. So therefore, you explain the unfamiliar in terms of the familiar. If we were here in North America, and I was trying to describe to you cricket, which is a game that's played in some places, and you're not familiar with cricket, and I would tell you it's just like baseball, you would understand that, because baseball is more familiar than cricket. But if we were in England, for example, more likely I would do the opposite. We'd be having a discussion, what is baseball like, and I would tell you baseball is just like cricket, and now you'd understand. Because here, baseball is familiar and cricket is unfamiliar. There, cricket is familiar and baseball is unfamiliar. So you always explain the unfamiliar in terms of the familiar. If the Nevi'im describe idolatry by comparing it to adultery, that means adultery is familiar, that everyone intuits the evil of adultery, what is wrong with adultery. They wouldn't necessarily understand what idolatry is. But I explained to you, you know what idolatry is? Idolatry is just like adultery. Oh, now I understand. Now I understand. But in a society in which the sanctity of marriage breaks down, there is no metaphor to explain idolatry. Right? If we would live in a society in which marriage would break down essentially, where there'd be no taboo against adultery, so how would we understand what exactly is wrong with idolatry? Now I'm going to come back to this, but let me give you one last illustration, which beautifully illustrates the point. Listen to this. Listen to this medrash. In a few weeks, we're going to read Parsha Shlach, the story of the Meraglim. The story of the Meraglim. So we know what happens is the Jews come to Moshe Rabbeinu. They want to send spies to reconnoiter the land. They want to see what Eretz Yisrael is like. So Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't think it's a good idea. He reluctantly agrees. The spies go. Terrible calamity happens. They come back with a negative report, and you know the rest of the story. So the Medrash tries to point out that the Jews were at fault for sending the Meraglim. This is something they shouldn't have asked for. They shouldn't have wanted to send spies. So the Medrash says, I'll give you a mashal. Imagine the following. Imagine a father is looking for a wife for his son. A shidduch. He's looking for a wife for his son. And he makes investigations, and he finds a young lady. He investigates the family, very fine family, the girl has very fine qualities. And he comes home and tells his son, son, I found the perfect wife for you. And the son says, I want to see for myself. I want to meet her. Can you imagine such a thing? So the Medrash says, that's what this is comparable to. God says that Eretz Yisrael is a wonderful land, and the Jews say, we want to see for ourselves. We want to send spies to see for ourselves. Now, if you can't fully appreciate how terrible that sin is, if God said Eretz Yisrael is good, and you want to see for yourself, so I'll give you a mashal, I'll give you an illustration which will really bring it down to earth. Imagine a son tells his father, I want to meet the girl myself before I marry her. Imagine such a thing. Now, that medrash does not resonate with us. Because to us, that makes perfect sense. Imagine if a father would come home and tell his son, son, I found the perfect wife for you, here she is. This is the wedding day, just show up. And you'll marry her. I mean, wait a minute, this is my wife, and I want to meet her. And we would think that's perfectly normal. So we don't have a mashal with which to understand the problem of the Meraglim. Because culturally, we live in a different time. This was something that has changed. But when this medrash was taught, that's not how marriages work. Parents arranged marriages. The young folk just came to the wedding, and that a child should say, I want to meet her myself, was something which was so self-evidently objectionable that we can use this as a mashal, use this as a metaphor to understand the story of the Meraglim. So now, if we were writing the medrash, maybe we'd have to do the opposite, right? If I was going to tell you that a son should trust his parents, I would say, you know what it's like? It's just like the Jews didn't trust God. God said Eretz Yisrael is good. And the Jews said, we want to see for ourselves. This is like that. But when the medrash was written, it was the opposite. The son, not questioning his father, is self-evidently the proper thing to do. And therefore, this serves as a mashal to understand the problem in the case of the Meraglim. So you get the idea. So I think that in the Torah's way of thought, marriage is very, very, very important for many reasons. But one of the reasons marriage is important is because our relationship to God, the way we relate to God, is based on certain human relationships. And when these human relationships break down, we no longer have a means by which we can relate to God. So when marriage breaks down, we don't have a understanding of the exclusivity our relationship with God has to have. I'll give you an example of another relationship of children to parents. Because in the Torah, there's a tremendous insistence. You have to honor your parents. And it's not like nowadays, where parents and want their children to be friends. A parent was a parent. A parent was a parent. And there was an authority, there was an honor. The Torah is insistent, okay? Maybe times have changed. Culturally, things are different. But with the breakdown of the respect for our parents, what does such expressions as Avinu Shebashamayim, our Father in heaven, what does that mean? What does it mean to us? If we're palsy-walsy with our fathers, so what does it mean when we address God, Avinu Shebashamayim, our Father in heaven? Or for that matter, if you call your father by his first name, Phil, right? By his first name. So what does it mean when you speak to God, our Father in heaven? And you might as well call him my pal in heaven. Right? Me and God like this, we're pals.
It blurs boundaries. There's no...
Exactly, right? So the point is that the Torah prescribes these relationships in a certain way, because otherwise we don't have the structure for understanding how we're meant to relate to God. So marriage, right away, becomes very, very important in terms of relationship to God. It isn't a private matter at all. It isn't between husbands and wives. Whereas the institution of marriage is something which very, very much impacts the way in which we relate to God. I was mentioning one interesting connection, that it says in the pasuk, "V'kineis ishto," that the man warns his wife. But the word kinei does not mean to warn. I mean, that's how it's translated, for lack of a better word in this context. But what does the word kinei mean? Well, we find elsewhere in the Chumash, God says about himself, "Ki anochi Hashem Elokecha." The reason God prohibits idolatry is because I, Hashem, am Keil Kana. Keil Kana, which is translated as a jealous God. I am a jealous God. So what do we have over here? We have the same root, Kuf Nun Aleph, in the one context with reference to God as being a jealous God, and in our parsha used as a synonym for warning. He warns his wife. And what does it really mean? Rav Hirsch explains that both translations are really inaccurate. What the idea of kana means is to insist on exclusivity. To insist on exclusivity. In other words, there are certain relationships in which exclusivity is not demanded. In other words, if you are my friend, that's fine if you have other friends too. In other words, I don't insist that I be your only friend. You're my friend, you can be his friend, her friend, many friends. I don't demand that type of exclusivity. But there are certain relationships which demand exclusivity. So, for example, the relationship with your husband, right? A woman can only have one husband. Can't have two husbands. That's an exclusive relationship. The very nature of marriage is exclusive. And there's another relationship which demands exclusivity, which is a relationship with God. It's not that God says, I'm your God, but you can have other gods too. It's an exclusive relationship. In other words, God is your Lord. It means He's the only one. There's no one else. So therefore it means, Anochi Hashem Elokecha Keil Kana. Doesn't mean I'm a jealous God. God isn't jealous of anybody. But God is insistent that the relationship with Him be exclusive. So Kana means insistent on exclusivity. That's what Kana means. Now, there can't be another. Not because He's jealous. No, there's no one to be jealous of. But He's insistent on the exclusive nature of the relationship. That's what Kana means. And when the husband warns his wife, v'kineis ishto, it also means that. The husband is asserting his prerogative to insist that there be absolute exclusivity, and therefore even for you to be alone with that man is a violation of that exclusivity. Now I'll mention a very, very interesting thing. there's an amazing question, a shaila, actual shaila halacha. There once was a man, this happened 150 years ago. There was a man who told his wife the following. There was a tzedakah collector. He was a schnorrer. He used to go from house to house collecting. And there was a suspicion that he was dishonest, that he was a thief. You know, sometimes there are people that are not 100% honest. So the husband told his wife, if that man comes to the house, don't let him in the house. Don't let him in the house. It's okay. She accepted the warning. And then the man comes knocking at the door. Her husband's away. The man comes knocking at the door. And he tells her a story. I'm hungry. Can I come in? So she has rachmana, she has pity. And she invites the man in and she gives him to eat. And the man leaves. Who knows, maybe he stole the spoons, I don't know. But he left. But when the husband came back, he had a serious shaila. So maybe his wife is a sota. Because he warned her not to let the man in the house. And she let the man in the house. So there was a warning, and she was secluded alone with him. So maybe she's forbidden to him unless she goes through the ritual of the sota. So the shaila was brought to the Beis Halevi. And the Beis Halevi wrote two responsa on this question. And the Beis Halevi gives the obvious answer. He says that the law of kinui is only when you warn her because you suspect hanky-panky. In other words, in this instance, the husband didn't tell her, don't let him into the house, I suspect you're going to consort with him. He said, don't let him into the house, he's going to steal the crown jewels. Totally different suspicion. So here, it doesn't have the luck of sota. But the way we're explaining, it makes perfect sense. Because kinui is not simply warning. Kinui means insistence on exclusivity. In other words, the very expression the Torah uses means that the husband is exercising his prerogative to insist on an exclusive relationship. If the warning is don't let him in because he might feel something, right, that's not what the husband is talking about. Kinui means an insistence on an exclusive relationship. So now we understand the first questions we raised. Was why is this ritual performed in the temple? And why was this ritual taught on the day of the dedication of the temple? And the answer is because this is not an issue which is in a different realm. In other words, upholding the exclusivity of marriage really is absolutely imperative to uphold the exclusivity of our relationship with God. The temple loses its meaning. The whole meaning of the temple is the place where we bound to the exclusive God, and in order to us to understand that and to appreciate the evil of violating that imperative, we have to have marriage which is intact. Now take it a step further. So we have this woman, the sota, and the sota really did a terrible thing. She violated the warning. She was tempted. Probably she wanted to be with that other man. But she didn't succumb to the temptation ultimately. She was cleared by the water, which means she did not actually commit adultery. Why not? Why not? It seems that she was on the verge of doing it. What stopped her?
She did a chula. She realized she was doing something wrong.
But specifically, what was the thought that went through her head? But I think that the point is this. You know, in the religious life, you know, there are times when we are motivated and inspired to do the right thing. You know, we feel deeply a love of God, attachment to God, a love for Torah, a love for mitzvahs, a yearning to do the right thing. We see in the mitzvahs of Torah, in the learning of Torah, our highest fulfillment, and that's wonderful. You know, this halavai should only be that that's always the case. But there are times that we don't feel so inspired. We don't feel like it. There are times we'd rather be somewhere else, we'd rather do something else, we'd rather enjoy something else. But what stops us? What stops us is that we've made a commitment, and we're bound by our commitment. And that means that we are going to live up to our word even when we don't particularly feel like it. I've had the occasion to speak at many weddings, and one idea that I've repeated time and time again, I think sometimes under the chuppah even, is that if you go to a Jewish wedding, you discover that it's not very romantic at all, the Jewish wedding ceremony. The Jewish wedding ceremony really is a legal contract. If you read the ksubah and translate it literally, it really sounds more like the merger of Chrysler and Fiat, to use an up-to-date example, than anything which is romantic or loving. It lays down the terms of payments that will be made, you know, in the case of the dissolution of the marriage, for that matter. And also it hints to obligations in the marriage, of support, etc., etc. It's a contract. What is the idea? The idea is like this, that what is the highest form of love is to commit oneself to fulfilling the obligations within marriage even when you don't particularly feel like it. Because everyone is in love on their wedding day. And you think that why do we need a ksubah, a contract, agreement, legalism? You know, we love each other, that should be enough. Our love should see us through until the end of days. The answer is because that feeling, those feelings that are present on the wedding day are not going to last forever. Maybe they'll last a week, a month, a few months. But sooner or later the time will come that we're not so inspired. We don't feel like it. But we do what we do because we made a commitment. We live up to our commitments. And to make those commitments really is ultimately the highest form of love. Because if I would say we don't need to get married because we love each other, that should be enough. That means that as long as I love you, and as long as I feel like it, I will do X, Y, Z. But the willingness to make a commitment means that I'm going to live up to my commitments even when I don't feel like it. But halavai, you know, a couple gets married, they should be in love forever. I mean, you know, I'm not an anti-romantic. I'm just pointing out that it's not enough. It's not enough. There has to be a commitment. And the nature of commitment means I will stand by my word. I will keep my pledges. I will honor them even when I don't particularly feel like it. I'm not particularly motivated, not particularly inspired. I may have some grievance. Maybe I'm upset about something, but I'm still going to do my duty. And if my duty is to support my wife, I'm going to go to work and support my wife, even if you know, I may not be so happy about something. You know, maybe dinner wasn't up to its usual standard yesterday. You know, I have to tell you a funny joke. Funny mindset, not particularly relevant to this, but a mashal, a very beautiful mashal. When the you know, by Rebbes, certain Rebbes, the practice was to daven late. There's a time when the prayers have to be said, but the certain rabbis, they were above time, and they would pray beyond the time. And this became an accepted practice in certain Hasidic courts. Anyway, by the early Ger Hasidim, that was their practice. They davened late, because the first Ger Rebbe was a Talmud of the Kotzker Rebbe, and that was the practice of Kotzker, davened late. And when the Imrei Emes became the Rebbe, Rebbe Mordechai, the son of the Sfas Emes, he changed it. Like overnight, he changed the whole thing, and he said, from now on, we're davening in the regular time like everyone else. We're not going to follow the practice of the previous generations to daven late. So the old Hasidim, what was going on? It was good enough for his father, good enough for his great-grandfather, well, it's not good enough for him. Now, who does he think he is? So one of the old Hasidim gave a mashal. He said like this. He said there once was a couple, married couple, and the wife used to prepare gourmet meals for her husband. Every meal was a sensation. Out of this world. It was something like Paul Bocuse and French cuisine. It was out of this world, but it always was late. Supper was never on time. He never said anything, and every meal was an experience. And after a while, she lost interest in gourmet cooking, and it became borscht, potatoes, kasha, a very simple thing. So one day, he says to her, tell me, why can't you ever serve supper on time? So she says, he never complained before. So he said, when you were cooking gourmet, okay, it was late. It was worth waiting for. He says, but if all you're serving is borscht, potatoes, kasha, at least give me on time. So this old chassid is like this, that in the earlier generations, the tefillas, the prayers were so warm and so fervent. So, okay, if they were late, God says, okay, they're late, but it's worth waiting for. So the way we daven, so uninspired, so cold, so at least you can be on time. Don't keep God waiting. So let's say, for example, last night's supper wasn't so good, right? And let's say it was late also. So a husband will say, listen, no supper last night, I'm not going to work. What do you mean? You have commitments. You live up to your commitments. Right? Everything has to be as you like it. You're a man of honor. You stand by your word. That's a very noble thing. And in a way, it's even more noble than the person who's motivated by love. The person motivated by love is doing what he wants to do. Whereas here, there's a sense of duty, a sense of responsibility. Let's go back to the Sota. Right? The Sota was tempted. Maybe she saw in this man something she didn't see in her husband. Maybe her husband was a very, very plain, uninteresting person. And maybe this man is dashing and exciting, and maybe he says the right things and makes her feel special, etc. And she's tempted. She's tempted. But she stops at the last minute. Why? Because there's a commitment. She gave her word under the chuppah. She pledged herself to her husband. And she said, I'm not going to go through with this. So the Torah says that if in fact she is innocent, it's not just that she's not punished, but she's rewarded. A blessing comes for that. Because that is something which is very, very, very special. Right? That a person, even when they don't feel like it, they don't feel inspired, a person lives up to his or her commitments. And I think that that really is a very, very important aspect of Avodas Hashem, too. Or worship of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Because remember, we're understanding that the significance of the Parsha of Sota is that it provides the metaphor for understanding how we're meant to relate to God. And I think to a great extent this is also true. In our relationship with God, which is a long-term relationship, it's not like every day we're so inspired. Like every day our souls are on fire. There are many days we just don't feel like it. We just don't feel like it. Don't feel like davening, don't feel like learning, don't feel like doing mitzvahs. I just feel like taking the day off. Taking the day off. But you can't take the day off. There's a commitment. It's a responsibility. That means whether we like it, we don't like it, we do what we have to do. Right? That's the lesson of the parsha of Sota. And I think we have to learn that lesson. Very important to learn that lesson. Let's take it a step further. Right after the parsha of Sota is the parsha of Nazir. Parsha of Nazir. And Chazal tell us that there's a juxtaposition. These two parshas weren't put next to each other haphazardly, but rather, Kol haroa Sota b'kilkula yazer afo min hayayin. If a person sees the Sota in her degradation, so he should become a Nazir. He should become a Nazir. Now, the simple explanation is because the Sota did something which is unconventional. So what might have been the cause? So Chazal say it might have been that she was out of control because she had drank. Harbe yayin osa. Wine can do a lot. So therefore, you should become a Nazir and swear off wine to ensure that you'll always remain in control. There may be a deeper connection between the parsha of Sota and the parsha of Nazir. We won't mind discussing. Was if the lesson of Sota is that we have to live up to our commitments, even when we don't feel like it, that is not a long-term solution. In other words, it's true that it may work once in a while, but we can't count on that working in the long run. We can't go through life day after day after day after day after day in an uninspired way. In other words, if our Jewish life has that character of doing it out of a sense of duty, but without inspiration, without passion, it's not going to last. So obviously there has to be the sense of duty, because there inevitably are going to be times when we are not inspired, but what we really have to do is work on the inspiration. We have to find ways of recharging and reigniting that inspiration. Okay? So we're operating on two levels. In other words, from the parsha of Sota, we learn the importance of feeling a sense of commitment, a sense of duty, to get us over those times when we are not particularly inspired. But at the same time, we know that if it's come to that, then we have to do something to inspire ourselves. Let's go back to the marriage, for example. Let's say the woman is on the verge of committing adultery, but she's a very noble person, a very committed person, and she says, no, I'm going to stand for my commitments, I'm going to be faithful to my husband. But what is the long-range prognosis for this marriage? Like, what's going to happen the next time she's tempted? So there better be some romance, some passion, which is quickly restored to this marriage. Otherwise, it's doomed. Well, there are only so many times that a sense of duty will tide you over. But after a while, there better be something more to it. So that's what the Torah is telling us. The Kolarella Sota B'Kpula. You see the Sota B'Kpula, Yaza Atzman Yayin. Now let me just add one dimension, make it clear. The Baal Shem wants to ask the question, why is it only the person who sees the Sota? Why only the person who sees the Sota? And if you didn't see the Sota, you don't need to take precautions. It says, Kol haroa Sota. If you saw the Sota, then you should become a Nazir. And if you didn't see the Sota, what if you heard about it? What if you read it in the newspaper? Like, why is it only if you saw the Sota? The Baal Shem says an interesting thing. He says, when you see something, when God brings it about that you should see something, don't think it's just by accident. It's haphazard. Everything you see in life, there's a reason. Because you wouldn't have been there if there's not a good reason for it. If it came about that you should behold, you should witness something, it must be there's a lesson there for you. So, let's analyze that. You come to the base of English one day, you're there on your own business, you're bringing your own carbon, and sure enough, that day there's a sota. And you see the suspected adulteress. So what does that mean? It means you should suspect, if God brought it about that I should see the sota, it must be that I'm at risk of being an adulterer or an adulteress. Not likely. Not likely. I think it means this, that it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be exact like the sota, but it means that there was something that you needed to learn. So again, it may be that if our conjectures are correct, that it may run this way. If you see the sota, and you see the importance of duty, overcoming temptation, what are you meant to learn from that? You're meant to learn from that, not that, okay, that's the strategy I will follow. You're meant to learn from that this is a strategy which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't work. You're lucky if it does, but it could just as well not. And therefore it's time to introduce passion. And that's what the Nazir is. The Nazir is the person who decides to introduce passion into his worship of God. And you develop passion by plunging yourself into something wholeheartedly. If you do half things, half measures, and there's very little passion in that. There is only genuine passion, genuine enthusiasm for the things that you throw yourself into, the b'lev v'nefesh, heart and soul. That's what the Nazir does. The Nazir says, one day he wakes up and he says, I am going to devote myself to the service of God in an extreme way. I am going to ignore my looks. I'm going to let my hair grow long. I'm going to ignore my pleasures. I am going to swear off wine, anything that remotely resembles wine. I am going to demand of myself a level of purity. I'm not going to come in contact with the dead. Why? Because I'm going to plunge myself, throw myself into the service of God in a passionate way. And that's what we need to do. When we see ourselves worshiping God with the strategy of the sota, uninspired, this out of sense of duty. I get up in the morning. Why? Not because I'm enthusiastic about what I'm going to do. I get up because I got to get up. It's my job, my responsibility, my duty. Says that can't last. You have to use extreme measures to renew the passion, to renew the enthusiasm in one's avodas Hashem. And that's what the parsha of Nazir is all about. Looking back over Shavuos last week, I always point out that in terms of pedagogy, staying up all night to study is probably one of the least effective ways of learning anything. In other words, if the issue of Shavuos was maximizing the amount of Torah that we are able to absorb, we would do it totally differently. We'd get a good night's sleep. The next day, be well rested. We'd study intensely during the day, etc. We'd probably remember more, accomplish more. What is the idea of this custom, a whole night to stay up? The idea is passion. The idea is to throw yourself into something. Do something with enthusiasm, with excitement, with energy, with fire. And just like in the case of the Nazir doesn't necessarily become a Nazir forever. So hopefully that's what Shavuos is. In other words, if you had a good Shavuos and you really threw yourself into it and observed it in a meaningful way, so it's true that the days after Shavuos we don't do such extreme things. But if the spark was kindled, hopefully there's a momentum which carries forward. But however you understand it, these mitzvahs, the mitzvah of the sot, the mitzvah of the nazir, these are very, very relevant to the way in which we worship God, and therefore relevant to the temple itself. So these were lessons that HaKadosh Baruch Hu felt necessary to teach to Moshe Rabbeinu on the very day that the Mishkan was dedicated. Because that's what it's all about. The dedication of the Mishkan really is the dedication of ourselves to the service of God, and therefore these are valuable lessons we need to learn. Okay, thank you very much. We'll see you all, B'ezras Hashem, next week.